The Spanish ulcer was how Napoleon Bonaparte, looking back, described the ruinous war in Spain. A campaign that was supposed to be swift and easy turned into a bloody, insoluble nightmare. Now, more than 2 centuries later, another uncompromising leader has given himself a similar ulcer, this time in a very different part of the world. The war with Iran has now dragged on for nearly a month, and with each passing day, it is becoming a bigger problem for President Donald Trump's administration. Although Trump says he is ready to talk and has proposed a 30-day ceasefire, the peace initiative may not reflect his true intentions toward Iran. Because even as Trump speaks of negotiations, 2 Marine Expeditionary Units and elements of the 82nd Airborne Division, 7,000 troops in total, are now heading toward the Middle East. There is growing speculation that Trump could use those forces to launch an invasion of Hark Island, or parts of Iran's coastline near the Strait of Hormuz. But reports of a coming invasion are not breaking Tehran's will to fight. Quite the opposite. Iran appears to believe it still has a real chance of prevailing in this confrontation, and that it has not yet played all the cards in its hand. Today, wars aren't decided by firepower alone, they are won through strategy, how you manage resources, build alliances and respond faster than your opponent. That's exactly what Supremacy World War III is all about, a free-to-play PvP strategy game where you take control of a real-world nation in the middle of a global crisis. You will be competing in real time against up to 99 other players, with matches that can last for weeks. You will grow your economy and build a modern military, from tanks and fighter jets to submarines and advanced missile systems, all while fighting step by step for global dominance. There is also the Elite Officers system, unique commanders you unlock and upgrade permanently, giving you new strategic options and long-term advantages in future games. The game is available on both PC and mobile, so you can jump back in whenever you want. Check out the link in the description to claim your free seasonal unit, the Elite Railgun, worth $40. This offer is available to new players and valid for 30 days. The past 2 weeks of the war with Iran has been marked by President Trump's constant shifts in posture. One day he draws a red line, the next he erases it himself, and then he offers a path to de-escalation. Few episodes captured that inconsistency better than the strike on South Pars and the 48-hour ultimatum. On March 18th, Israeli aircraft struck Iranian gas facilities linked to the South Pars field. This is the largest known natural gas reserve in the world, shared by Iran and Qatar. The Qatari section is known as North Dome. According to the American press, Trump not only knew Israel was planning such a strike, but may have personally given it the green light. The attack on South Pars marked a break with Trump's earlier policy. At the start of the war, when Israel bombed oil storage facilities near Tehran, members of the president's team reportedly contacted the Israelis to urge them not to hit such targets again. Several hours after the strike on South Pars, Iran retaliated. Iranian forces hit Arab oil and gas infrastructure on the opposite side of the Persian Gulf. Among the targets was the Ras Laffan LNG complex in Qatar, which appears to have suffered the heaviest damage that night. According to Qatar Energy, the attack damaged facilities responsible for 17% of Qatar's export capacity, equivalent to roughly 3.4% of global LNG supply. Repairs are expected to take between 3 and 5 years. Once the scale of the damage became clear, President Trump reversed course completely. He publicly claimed that he had known nothing about the Israeli strike on Iran's South Pars facilities. He also said he had instructed Prime Minister Netanyahu that Israel was not to target any more oil and gas infrastructure. But the de-escalation did not last. 2 days later, Trump issued Iran a 48-hour ultimatum. Reopen the Strait of Hormuz or we will destroy Iran's thermal power plants. Once again, Tehran did not back down. Iranian officials warned that if Trump carried out his threat, Iran would retaliate by striking power plants and water desalination facilities on the Arab side of the Gulf. And when the ultimatum expired, Trump did not attack. Instead, he announced that talks with Iran had begun, that the war would soon come to an end, and that any strikes on Iranian power plants were being suspended for another 5 days. As the 5-day deadline began to run out, Trump changed his mind again and extended it once more, giving the Iranians an additional 10 days until April 6th. And he did so despite the fact that there had been no diplomatic breakthrough at all. If anything, the only signals coming out of Tehran were signals of defiance and determination to keep fighting. Even Trump's own allies no longer seem sure how to interpret his Iran policy. That is hardly surprising. At its core, the president's strategy is built around two goals that cannot be fully reconciled. Trump clearly wants to win the current war with Iran. He wants it to look like a total victory, with Tehran forced to accept terms dictated by Washington, or at the very least, he wants it to appear that way. But at the same time, Trump fears that the war could trigger a surge in oil and fuel prices, something he is determined to avoid at all costs. As a result, every time when crude price moves close to $100 a barrel, Trump sends a de-escalatory signal to the market, suggesting that the war may soon be nearing its end. That desire to keep oil prices at a relatively acceptable level significantly limits the pressure tools available to the United States. Even amid war and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, Iran is still exporting oil with relative freedom. The Americans are not striking Iranian tankers or export terminals because they fear the effect on prices. More than that, Washington has effectively made it easier for Iran to keep its oil on the market by suspending sanctions on Iranian crude for 30 days. The result of this internally contradictory policy is that Trump is steadily losing control over the course of escalation, while Tehran's position is strengthening. In effect, even Trump himself seems to be concluding that the war with Iran is heading toward a dead end, and that he should pull back before the sands of the Middle East drag him into yet another forever war, just as they did to previous American presidents. On Monday, March 23rd, President Trump said he had established contact with the Iranians. The details of those talks remain unknown, but Tehran itself denies that any negotiations are taking place at all. What does seem clear is that messages between the United States and Iran are being passed through Pakistan, with diplomats from Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia also helping facilitate the process. As part of those exchanges, Pakistani intermediaries were reportedly meant to deliver Tehran what has been described as President Trump's 15 points. The document calls for a 1-month ceasefire, a ban on Iranian uranium enrichment, new restrictions on Iran's ballistic missile program, and Tehran's support for pro-Iranian militias across the region. In return, Trump is said to be offering sanctions relief and guarantees that those sanctions would not be reimposed. Although Trump's terms as laid out in those 15 points are somewhat more favorable than they were before the war, the attempt to regulate both Iran's nuclear program and the broader functioning of the so-called axis of resistance still crosses a clear Iranian red line. In previous years, the United States repeatedly tried to expand negotiations with Iran to cover those same issues, and each time the Iranians refused. Pakistan says it has not yet received an official response from Tehran to Trump's 15 points, but all signs suggest that Iran has, in effect, rejected the American president's offer. That, at least, is what the statements of Mohammad Ghalibaf and Abbas Araghchi appear to indicate. At this point, it is worth asking how the war looks from Tehran's perspective. How does Iran assess the current state of the conflict? and the direction in which it is heading. Despite the fact that Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was killed in an Israeli airstrike, along with many senior Iranian political and military figures, the authorities of the Islamic Republic appear convinced that the war should continue until Tehran secures a comprehensive agreement with the United States, one that guarantees the survival of the regime and includes strong safeguards preventing Trump from walking away from the deal as easily as he did with the JCPOA in 2018. The Islamic Republic has entered survival mode. This war poses an existential threat to Tehran, but from Iran's point of view, a bad peace poses much the same danger, and that has major implications for how the conflict may evolve. First of all, Iran rejects the idea of a tactical ceasefire without a broader settlement with the United States. Tehran believes such a pause would only serve American and Israeli interests, giving them time to study the mistakes of the current campaign, regroup their forces, and strike Iran again in a few months. In practice, such a pause would be a recipe for turning Iran into a failed state. It is difficult to imagine how the country could rebuild from wartime destruction if American sanctions remain in place. From Iran's perspective, continuing the war under current conditions may therefore seem preferable. The Americans underestimated their opponent and are not prepared for a prolonged confrontation with Tehran. Iran, meanwhile, still holds several pressure tools in reserve. After its opening salvo, it did not exhaust its stockpile of drones and missiles. Quite the opposite. The pace of strikes over the past 2 weeks has remained steady, and on some days has exceeded 100 attacks. At the same time, according to RUSI, some Israeli and American defense systems may soon face critical shortages. The Arrow system, in particular, is said to be approaching its limit. That is why Iran's threat of a prolonged closure of the Strait of Hormuz appears credible. Combined with strikes on Arab oil and gas infrastructure, it means that every additional day of war brings enormous costs for the global economy, which now faces not only the prospect of worldwide energy crisis, but also the risk of a global recession. Iran appears to believe that this is precisely how it can force America to bend, through the closure of Hormuz and attacks on Arab energy infrastructure. The logic in Tehran is that soaring oil and gas prices will eventually push Trump toward concessions, and the events of the past few days seem to suggest that this strategy may be working. Trump backed away from his 48-hour ultimatum and offered peace talks instead. Perhaps the clearest indication that Iran sees this as a success came from Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, who put it bluntly: the fact that they are now talking about negotiations is an admission of defeat. After all, just recently they were declaring that we had signed an unconditional surrender. President Trump has already declared several times that the war with Iran has been won. But this is political narrative, not strategic reality. Trump cannot simply declare victory on his own and withdraw the American armada. The Strait of Hormuz has effectively become Iran's hostage. If Trump were to pull US forces out under current conditions, he would in practice be admitting that Iran can unilaterally control movement through the strait. That would create serious problems not only for the international principle of freedom of navigation, but also for America's relationships with the Arab states of the Gulf. At this stage, the door to diplomacy remains open. Both the Americans and the Iranians appear willing to talk and to end the war through negotiations. But their visions of what a final agreement should look like differ so fundamentally that a quick end to the fighting seems unlikely. Trump wants a tactical ceasefire, one that would not constrain him in the future if he chose to return to military options. Tehran, by contrast, wants a lasting settlement that would lift sanctions and secure the survival not only of the Islamic Republic, but also of Iran's regional allies. Iranian officials reportedly told mediators that they would not accept any agreement that excluded Lebanon's Hezbollah, which now faces the prospect of another Israeli ground invasion. But this diplomatic window may not stay open for long. In Iran, power is being consolidated by hardline figures closely tied to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. They are replacing pragmatists who were killed in Israeli airstrikes. This is visible, for example, in the appointment of the new Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council. Its previous head, Ali Larijani, a well-known pragmatist with broad international contacts, was replaced by Mohammad Zolgadr, a specialist in proxy warfare who took part in the creation of the elite Quds Force and the broader axis of resistance. The Supreme National Security Council is a key institution within Iran's power structure. It is here, not in the president's office, that the broad framework of Iranian policy is shaped. And the person serving as the council's secretary functions as a kind of barometer of mood within the Iranian elite, and of the direction in which Iranian policy is heading. That is why Ali Larijani's appointment to the post in 2025 was widely and rightly interpreted as a signal that Tehran was ready for nuclear talks. Zolgadr's appointment sends a far less encouraging message. It suggests that the hardliners are closing ranks, preparing for a longer confrontation with the United States and Israel, and signaling a greater role for the IRGC in Iran's governing machinery. Another factor that could shut the door on diplomacy is Donald Trump's temperament. Although the president says he is open to peace talks, it is doubtful that he would accept Iran's terms. Trump still wants to emerge from this war looking like a victor, and that is a recipe for deadlock in negotiations and for the conflict to continue. And the longer the war drags on, the more frustration is likely to build in the White House. As the South Pars episode already showed, that frustration may push Trump toward risky decisions and further escalation. Israel too is playing its own game, as is Prime Minister Netanyahu, who played a central role in Trump's decision to go to war. It was Netanyahu who convinced Trump that Iran was a, quote, paper tiger, and that the Islamic Republic would quickly buckle under the weight of American and Israeli bombing. After nearly a month of fighting, it is clear that Netanyahu's claims were an illusion. Iran's power structure is still holding firm, and there is no sign that the Islamic Republic is on the verge of collapse. Although the events of recent weeks have undoubtedly damaged Netanyahu's credibility in Trump's eyes, the Israeli Prime Minister still retains leverage he can use to push the American president in his preferred direction. The most powerful of those tools is the threat of ground invasion of southern Lebanon. Since March 2nd, Israel has been conducting intensive airstrikes against Hezbollah targets, with more than 1,000 people reportedly killed so far, including both fighters from the Party of God and civilians. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz described these attacks as an effort to apply to Lebanon the model used in Rafah and Beit Hanun, two towns in Gaza that were in effect leveled by the Israeli army. The bombing campaign in southern Lebanon appears to be shaping the battlefield for the future ground operation. Israel's likely objective is to advance as far as the Litani River, around 25 kilometers into Lebanese territory. Such an invasion is backed especially strongly by Netanyahu's far-right coalition partners. Israel's finance minister Bezalel Smotrich has even said that the Litani River should become the new border between Israel and Lebanon. Given what is happening in the West Bank, such threats should be taken seriously. An Israeli invasion of Lebanon could, in effect, block any agreement between the United States and Iran. As mentioned earlier, Tehran wants the Hezbollah question to be one of the points covered in any future deal with Washington. Iran's new political and military leadership appears to understand that Ayatollah Khamenei's previous policy toward the axis of resistance was a mistake. After 2023, Israel gradually degraded the various groups that made up that axis, while Iran largely stood by and watched. This time Tehran wants to play the game differently. It wants to wage this war on the basis of what it calls the unity of fronts, insisting that any eventual agreement with America must protect not only the Islamic Republic itself, but also all its allies within the axis of resistance. That demand runs directly against Israel's plans. As you are watching this, thousands of American troops are heading toward the Middle East to join Operation Epic Fury. Among them are around 5,000 Marines from the 11th and 31st Marine Expeditionary Units, along with roughly 2,000 troops from the 22nd Airborne Division. Just hours before the expiration of the 5-day window Trump had given Iran to work out an agreement, the president reversed course once again and extended the deadline by another 10 days. Once that new 10-day window expires, the original threat contained in Trump's first 48-hour ultimatum is expected to return to the table. The question is whether he will actually follow through this time, or whether, once again, fears of rising fuel prices will push him to send the market a de-escalatory signal instead. Knowing the temperament of the American president, he himself may not yet know what the final decision he will make. What we do know is that every option remains on the table, including the most escalatory one: a limited ground invasion of Iran. Among the potential targets being discussed here are Hark Island, through which roughly 90% of Iran's oil exports pass, and Keshma Island, located near the entrance to the Strait of Hormuz. Military officials warn that such an operation could lead to heavy American casualties. Even after nearly a month of fighting, the threat posed by Iran's coastal military assets has not been eliminated. Iranian missile bases in the south remain active. Mobile anti-ship missile launchers are also believed to be operating there, waiting for US Navy vessels to move within range. On top of that, Iran still has thousands of drones that could be used against an American landing force. Even a limited ground operation could cause American casualties to rise exponentially, without definitively tipping the balance of victory in Washington's favor. Iran has also warned that any ground invasion of one of its islands or any stretch of its coastline would bring Yemen's Houthis into the war, a force that has so far remained outside the conflict. If the Houthis were activated, that could mean the blockade of the Bab al-Mandab Strait, through which roughly 10% of global trade and 12% of world's oil supplies pass, and that would deliver yet another blow to the global economy and could send oil prices to historic highs. One thing is worth noting. Trump entered this confrontation with Iran buoyed by the success he had achieved in Venezuela. He seemed to believe that same formula that delivered victory in Caracas would work again in Tehran. The removal of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was supposed to bring about the collapse of the Islamic Republic, or at the very least, intimidate the rest of the Iranian elite into begging Trump for a compromise. But this time, there was no figure like Delcy Rodriguez, no member of the existing elite willing to defect and cross over to the American side. More than that, the removal of Khamenei and influential pragmatists, such as Ali Larijani, has concentrated power in the hands of hardliners, who saw the previous policy as too soft. What the Americans still seem unwilling to admit is that this war has revealed to Iran's elite just how powerful Tehran's pressure tools really are. Iranian ballistic missiles and drones are wreaking havoc on critical infrastructure across the Arab world, while several attacks on commercial shipping have in effect turned the Strait of Hormuz into a blockade zone and allowed Iran to extract a kind of toll from intimidated ship owners. Iran has taken the global economy hostage, believes time is working on its favor, and is unlikely to compromise easily. Trump's next moves remain a major unknown. As always, he is unpredictable, and this time he simply lacks good options. Any attempt to end the war quickly would require accepting Iranian terms, and not even the best PR specialists would be able to present that as an American victory. If Trump wants to impose his own conditions on Tehran, the only remaining path is further military escalation. But that raises immediate questions about the cost of such escalation and about its operational horizon, with no clear end in sight. Because what happens if a limited American ground operation, on Kashmir Island for example, fails to force Iran into concessions? Would Trump then choose an even larger invasion, repeating the mistakes of Afghanistan and Iraq? That remains to be seen. But one thing is already clear. Trump's Iranian ulcer is growing, and any attempt to remove it will be painful. Quick reminder, Supremacy World War III is a free-to-play PvP strategy game, where you compete against real players for global dominance. Head to the link in the description to claim your free Elite Railgun unit, worth $40. The offer is valid for 30 days and available to new players only.